All right, welcome to the October 28th, 2025 meeting of the University of Rhode Island Board of Trustees Governance Committee. The meeting is being held in person with some committee members participating remotely. At this time, I will conduct a roll call attendance to determine if a quorum is present. Please clearly respond present via WebEx or present in person when your name is called. Committee Chair Courtney Nicolato, I am present in person. Vice Chair Jay Placencia. Charlie Fogarty. Monica Garnes.
Present via WebEx.
Matthew Lenz. Joseph Matthews.
Present via WebEx.
David Caprio. And Mark Palange.
Present via WebEx.
We also have Board Vice Chair Armand Sabatoni as well. For the benefit of all, I'll ask Interim Board Secretary Emily Diamondes to recognize members of senior leadership who are participating remotely. She will also identify those present in the meeting room.
Thanks, Courtney. So today I see Alyssa Boss, Chris Barker, Kara Larson, Mark Antonucci, Heather McCleary, Chelsea Berry, Abby Benson, Markeisha Miner, Bethany Jenkins, Matt McDonald, and Ellen Reynolds.
Great. Charlie's here.
And I think here comes Charlie.
And I see that Charlie Fogarty has just joined us. Welcome, Charlie. We're glad you're here. Just in time, my friend, just in time.
Sorry, Madam Chair, this computer, the procrastinator, has got to get a new computer.
All right, well, we'll add that to your action items by the end of the meeting, my friend. So we do have a quorum, and we'll call the meeting to order. Reminder to all members, for the benefit of our audience and the note taker, please clearly identify yourself whenever you comment, make a motion, or a second to a motion. Participants using WebEx are required to keep their cameras on if WebEx allows you to. We've had some trouble here in the room. Participants also, as remote members, and all persons present at the meeting location must clearly audible and visible to each other. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge that the University of Rhode Island occupies the traditional stomping ground of the Narragansett Nation and the Niantic people. Are there any proposed amendments to the published agenda? All right, there are no proposed amendments, and we'll move on to agenda, the approval of the minutes. May I have a motion that the committee approve the minutes of the June 9th, 2025 meeting?
Charlie Fogarty, so moved.
Thank you, Charlie. May I have a second?
Joe
Monica
Matthews,
Garnes.
second.
Thank you, Monica and Joe. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll ask for a voice vote. All in favor, please say yes. Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion to approve the minutes of the June 9th, 2025 meeting is approved. The next item on the agenda is item number 2, which is our discussion items. These have no action necessary, and we'll walk through just a couple of updates. So item 2A is a discussion of upcoming board vacancies and the nomination process. This is our annual calendar task. We have a number of trustees whose terms end in February of 2026. And a lot of folks who we know and love, Margot Cook, Joseph Formicola, Vahid Onjazadi, and Tom Ryan, and Armand Sabatoni. Additionally, Bob Wagon's resignation has left a vacancy which must be filled. So as usual practice, we will be reaching out to the board members whose terms are expiring to see if they'd be interested in continuing on. As everyone knows, that the appointing of new and returning trustees is the governor's responsibility. Each year, URI does update the governor on board activities and needs, and we are in the process of planning that right now. We also will share around current board composition. And so we will also share the details on whose terms are expiring, how many seats we may have open at any given time. And so that will all be happening between now and the new year. Margot usually will have a meeting with the governor towards the beginning of the year to discuss the board and all that. So I know that that's in the process of being put together. So my question for the board, I know that we do our board composition survey every year, and we've reviewed that as a governance committee. What I'm going to ask is that every member of the Board of Trustees provide at least one nomination so that we continue to build a pool of great URI supporters that we believe could be great candidates. There is times that the governor will ask if we have any recommendations, and so we want to make sure that we've got a pool of great candidates. So that nomination form will be launching I believe at the next meeting, board meeting next week, where we'll be sharing with our members just details and asks for that nomination form to be completed. So I want to stop there and see, one, if there's any questions about the annual process, and two, any thoughts as we head into this next cycle.
Courtney, just a question. We are still a relatively new board, and maybe Mark would be able to answer this. What is the usual length of service that someone serves on the board? Is there a length of time? I know it can vary, but is there an average length that, just so we know?
I mean, we did have colleagues who served 3-year terms at the start, and then for a variety of reasons stepped down. But we were also fortunate to have colleagues who continued their terms. So I'd say the short answer is no, there isn't a typical length of time. There's sort of the minimum of 3, and then after that it can go. And I think probably it would be good if Courtney, unfortunately, the chair of the board is not here, but I think you and Margot would want to have a conversation together.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the continuity is definitely good, especially I think I've come to really appreciate the hard work and thoughtfulness of my fellow trustees. But I didn't know if there was some, what the average turnover was that would maintain a healthy flow of new people and new information coming in or whatever else. Because this is still, in some sense, our first cycles of the.
Agreed. All right. I know I launched right into 2B, which was the launch of the annual board membership nomination form, but any questions on the process above and beyond? I appreciate the comment, Charlie. All right. Do we think it's a fair ask to ask board members, each board member to put at least one nomination?
Sure.
Okay. I will need your help in the nudging of that department. All right. All right, item 2C is the review of the URI Board of Trustees policy review schedule. And with us today is Kara Larson and Christopher Barker, who will share more about this agenda item. So welcome, Kara and Christopher.
Thank you, Courtney. I'm going to turn this right over to Christopher to go through the enclosed policy review schedule for you.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I wanted to draw your attention to the policy review schedule. I did want to begin by emphasizing just how quickly this kind of a document can fluctuate in terms of the details of timing. So please note the caveat that any forward-looking projection of a policy development timeline that looks as far out as a year is going to be inherently subject to change. There will be other priorities that will emerge. But these capture at least the scheduled revision dates that we know of that are upcoming, and get those on your radar. So we have coming up the policies on non-discrimination, and we discussed back in June the policy on policies and the intention to combine the board's policy on policies with the university's policy on policies into one singular policy document. And we have those slated for April, and then you'll see at the end of 26 in November, we have intellectual property upcoming. So we have a bit of a concentration with six policies upcoming in this in this cycle, and then just 3 looking out on the program schedule, looking out for the remainder of the year.
This is great. And Christopher, I know we've done a lot of work kind of consolidating and optimizing the governance committee's time, but also what your needs are based on timing of policy. So I appreciate the work that you and Kara have put in.
Sure. Thank you. And we'll continue with informal updates as new policies emerge to make sure the board staff is well notified.
Great. Any questions on the calendar itself? All right, so you see from the calendar, there's a lot of policies to take a look at. So our next item on the agenda is action items, which is item number 3. And so we've got, I think it's 6 different policies to review. We will do an omnibus-like vote at the end of the review of all these policies, unless we feel like we need to make edits or whatever for an individual one, if that makes sense for all. So let's move to 3A, which is the consideration of the policy on conflict of interest and commitment.
Okay, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here to talk to you all about the 6 policies, and I do understand that that's kind of a heavy load for based on our past cadence of policies to this committee, but I would say that that is a testament to the very hard work that Christopher has put in since joining the university last January. He really hit the ground running, and he has done wonders with the policy development process and getting these policies forward all the way through the development process, community comments, APC approval, all the way up to where we are today with the board. So I just want to give that call out to Christopher and thank him very much for all he's done so far, and looking forward to a lot more hard work from him. So let's look at the policy on conflict of interest and commitment. So what we have here in your materials is actually a clean, non-redline format, although there is an existing policy on ethics and conflict of interest. This new policy is intended to supersede the existing policy in its entirety. So it's not wasn't really suitable for just redlining and doing updates. It's kind of a refresh. So what we've done with this new version is simplify extensively and clarify language around the ethical obligations of employees. We have provided illustrative examples that are likely to occur in a university setting that we feel are more helpful to employees in their understanding of their obligations than the previous policy, which was very legalistic, had a lot of legal references to the Code of Ethics, and a lot of feedback indicated that we needed a more user-friendly presentation. We've also removed references to the Board of Trustees as being subjected to the terms of the policy, and that has been replaced with references to this board's bylaws. So the policy is now employee-centered, and the board's obligations are reflected in its own bylaws. We've also added a new section on conflict of commitment. This is a slightly different concept than conflict of interest. So conflict of commitment basically refers to outside activities that that would essentially cause an employee to split their allegiance between the university and some other activity or institution. So in other words, time and effort that is spent that could directly or significantly interfere with or compromise or even appear to compromise an employee's ability to fulfill their obligations to the university, it would be deemed a conflict of commitment. So that is a new section that has been added to the policy. We have also established HR as the primary contact for questions. In the prior policy, questions were referred to the general counsel, and our new HR function, new VP of HR, will now take over that basic administration of the policy. And while we were in the development of this new policy, the state made updates to the Code of Ethics, the Rhode Island Code of Ethics. So that caused a couple of last-minute updates and additions to this version of the policy, specifically the definition of interested person and the monetary value of allowable gifts, which were easy changes. But because the rule changes aren't effective until January 1st, 2026, we're asking that the effective date of this policy be January 1st, 2026, to align with the effective date of those changes to the Rhode Island Code of Ethics that are reflected in this policy. So approving this policy would require rescission of the existing policy on ethics and conflict of interest. And so the rescission date of that under the proposed omnibus motion that Courtney will present would be effective 1/1/26 as well.
So this is and let me ask you, once we get that ethics, I think every April to fill out all the forms for the state, and we're gonna start getting forms from the University of Rhode Island to fill out same type of things like we do for the state?
No.
No.
Yeah. So we just have the state one as illustrated in our bylaws.
Oh,
Yeah. So this is specifically for employees, right, Kara?
Right. Yeah, it's become employee centered, and as I said, the references to the Board of Trustees have been removed, and that's now all governed by your own bylaws rather than this university policy.
all right. Yeah, I was just wondering if we had some conflicts between their rules and our rules and which one supersedes.
Right. That's a good question.
Yep. Should I just roll on forward?
Is there any questions on this policy other than Armand? Thank you, Armand. Joe?
I have a question. Kara, this is Joe Matthews.
Yeah.
The conflict of commitment, who is the decider?
Well, there's an enforcement mechanism in the policy, and it's really these kinds of situations come to light usually through one of our reporting avenues, and then it will be looked at by HR to determine whether there exists a conflict of commitment.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Armand. Hearing no additional questions, yeah, let's head to 3B.
Okay. So this is the policy on consensual relationships. This is an existing policy, so this is an update. So your packet does contain a red line version, so you can see the exact changes that were made. I know the red line version looks a little scary because there's a lot of red there, but it actually does not contain a lot of substantive changes. What we've done is make general updates to language and provide a lot of clarification of defined terms, making it a much simpler policy, kind of like we were doing with the conflict of interest and commitment, making the language a lot more user-friendly, a lot more clear and simple. We did add greater detail on reporting and enforcement, so that's new. And then because we've clarified the existing types of relationships that might occur and what the rules around those are in the body, the exception section has been significantly shortened. And all that clarifying language made the table at the end of the existing policy superfluous. So that's being removed. So that we think makes the policy a lot cleaner and easier for employees to follow and understand. And again, we view this as a companion policy to the policy on conflict of interest and commitment. So we're also asking that the effective date of this policy be January 1st, 26 as well.
Great.
Questions?
Okay. All right, let's keep on keeping on.
Okay. The next one is the policy on university trademarks and licensing. And this is also an update to an existing policy. And this is very simple. It's mainly to reflect the fact that we're moving the administration of this policy from the Vice President of Student Affairs to the Vice President for Communications and Marketing. And so that is what tracks all of the red line on this policy is references changing from student affairs to communications and marketing. And there's some additional detail regarding trademark enforcement that has been added. So this is a very simple update, basically, and keeping and consistent with the way we do most policies. This version of this policy would become effective upon approval by the board. So whatever date that is, that would be the effective date of this policy, as opposed to our request for the other policies of having a later date.
Great. Any questions? No questions on my front. Okay. All right, 3D, policy on tuition fees and charges.
Okay. This is a brand new policy, but it is presented to codify the existing process by which the board approves changes to tuition charges or fees. A little history: prior to the creation of the Board of Trustees, as you all know, the university was subject to the Office of Post-Secondary Commissioner, which is a state agency, and they had two policies for higher education around tuition and fees. When the board was created by statute, RIGL 16-32-2, all of the powers and authority of the Office of Post-Secondary Commissioner with respect to URI was transferred to this board. So those policies that address tuition and fees for higher education became obsolete. So this policy is just a codification of what the board has been doing, for the most part. It recognizes the board's final authority over setting all tuition and mandatory fees, but also delegates to the president approval of tuition rates for URI online and student exchange programs. The policy also introduces a concept called differential charges. A differential charge is a charge that a student would be required to pay, and it's program specific, and it would be based on the program's cost to deliver and or the market value of the resulting degree or certification. And finally, the policy delineates the procedures for by which the university would propose to the board new changes, new tuition or mandatory fees, as well as changes to tuition or mandatory fees. And then the second set of procedures is about the president's delegated approval authority for new or changes to non-mandatory fees and differential charges. If anyone has any questions, I would defer those to, as I had understood that the provost would be here, but in the absence of the provost,
Barbara's
maybe
here.
Abby.
I'm here.
Okay. So if anyone has specific questions around the genesis and the content, we're very grateful that Provost Wolf has agreed to join.
Provost, any comments on it or any thoughts from your perspective?
No, I think it's a policy that has taken a lot of different input over the many months that people have been working on this. And in terms of the differential charge, right now we have program fees, so this is not really necessarily doing anything new, but moving forward, that gives us the best nimbleness.
Okay. Any questions from the committee? Okay. 3E is around the policy on conflict of interest in research. The next two are about research from what I see.
Yeah, so I'm going to combine these two and talk about them jointly. So both of these research specific policies are intended to maintain compliance with federal regulations and policies, as well as to create alignment with the revised policy on conflict of interest and commitment that's applicable to all university employees. So the policy on financial conflict of interest in research has been updated, and there's a red line version to guide you on what the updates were. And it was updated mostly to align its content and language and verbiage with the policy on conflict of interest and commitment. And some content that was deemed more appropriate for procedures was removed and will be incorporated into a procedures document. So that content doesn't necessarily disappear or become non-applicable, but it will be incorporated into procedures. The companion policy on conflict of commitment in research is a new policy. There was a lot of discussion over whether to mirror the university-wide policy on conflict of interest and commitment in one policy and put these two research policies together. But it was finally recommended that conflict of commitment and research be a standalone policy based on some language in a proposed rule by the Department of Energy, and with required attestations related to federal grant awards that differentiate attestation with conflict of interest and a separate attestation regarding conflict of commitment. So that's why we have a standalone policy, and that's brand new. But while they are intended to align with the first two policies, we do not necessarily need the effective date of these policies to wait until January. We would expect that these policies will become effective on approval by the board. And again, I will, since we have the Bethany Jenkins and Heather McClary here, I think if anyone has any content related questions, I would defer to them.
Looks good to me. Any questions?
Okay. Did I miss anything, Christopher?
Nothing at all. That was wholly complete.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Kara. Any further discussion on items 3A through 3F? All right. May I have a motion that the committee recommend that the board approve the new and revised policies in the enclosures 3A through 3F, including superseding prior policies where indicated as presented? That was a mouthful. May I have a motion?
Charlie Fogarty, so moved.
Thank you, Charlie. May I have a second?
Monica Garn, second.
Thank you, Monica. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing no discussion, I'll ask for a voice vote. All in favor, please say yes. Yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Let the record show that Matt Lenz has also joined us. Hey, Matt, the motion is approved. Item 3G is the consideration of amendments to the URI Board of Trustees bylaws. And I will turn it over to Vice President and General Counsel, Alyssa Boss.
Thanks. So this is an annual item for this committee to review the bylaws, and I wanted to bring some proposed changes for your consideration together with any that you may want to discuss. The changes that I've offered here primarily relate to the Open Meetings Act. And I know this committee and the board is committed to transparency and holding open meetings and committee meetings. But by including certain language in our bylaws, we have made it effectively legally subject to the Open Meetings Act, because the Attorney General takes the view that if your bylaws say you comply with it, you're legally obligated to comply with it. And so what I've suggested is some changes that reflect that wherever the law is applicable, it will apply regardless of whether our bylaws say it applies or not. And there's a difference between voluntarily complying with certain requirements of the Open Meetings Act that may or may not be applicable, and making ourselves legally subject to them. By making the changes that I'm offering here, it effectively preserves an argument that, for instance, where we have purely advisory committees, advisory bodies are not subject to certain requirements like filing minutes within 30 days after a meeting. And this would make it clear that if someone was to complain and say, you didn't get your minutes in 30 days, even though we do endeavor to do that, we would be able to say we're actually not subject to that requirement. And so what I'm trying to do here is just make some language, tweak the language to make it so we're not holding ourselves to a higher standard than what's actually legally applicable. And we can still always hold ourselves to a higher standard, but we don't necessarily want to make ourselves subject to a legal requirement. And so the first change there is in Article 3, Section 3.1. I've just clarified, offered some language to clarify. Would you like me to share screen, Courtney?
Sure, that'd
Or
be
does
great.
everybody have it in front of them? Let me share. All right, so can everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay, so this first change is just to clarify that Article 3 relates to board meetings. So there's just a few pieces of language in there to make it clear that this meeting language does not relate to committee meetings. That's covered in the committee section. And so I've added the word applicable before provisions of the Open Meetings Act. So we're not sort of making ourselves subject to requirements that are not otherwise applicable to us. And then here again, I've said of the board in section 3.8, and we basically repeated here in the bylaws that will be convened pursuant to the Open Meetings Act. And again, I've just offered the word applicable here. And then here in conduct of committee meetings, we had said with respect to special committee meetings, except as otherwise allowed by law. And what I've suggested is that we move that up so that applies both to standing and special committee meetings that we may, again, we may voluntarily do certain things, but we don't necessarily need to make ourselves required legally to do them under Chapter 42, 46 by including this language. So we should allow ourselves a leeway of saying except as otherwise required by law with respect to all of our committee meetings. This is just a grammatical. And I'm going to go back to this one on page 11 because it's a separate thing. All right, so that's that. That's the first set of changes. And then on this page 11, this change is, you know, I just went because we have a quote from the university manual, and I just went to check the university manual and make sure the language hadn't changed. And it hadn't changed, but I did see that there was a sentence or two that was actually not included in what we quoted. So for accuracy, I'm suggesting that we include an ellipsis here to show that that's not the full language. That was everything. I mean, really the idea is just, you know, we preserve our defenses if we're, you know, again, voluntarily complying because we are committed to transparency. But then someone has a complaint about some aspect that we didn't comply with. It still preserves our defenses if we wouldn't otherwise legally be required under applicable open meetings laws to comply with a particular requirement.
And so, Alyssa, I appreciate these. I think one of the things we want to continually do is ensure that our bylaws are leading with transparency, which it does, but also that it mirrors our legal requirements. And so I feel like these edits have brought us closer to, so I appreciate the work here.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments for Alyssa?
Yes, Courtney. The second one I don't have a problem with. The first one, Alyssa, remind me how it's different from what was discussed at our last meeting that we decided not to do anything on.
So we're still saying that we're gonna follow applicable provisions of the open meetings law, and we can continue to go above and beyond what's required by the open meetings law. And I think that that's what this board wishes to do with respect to its committee meetings, like to continue to comply with things, even if it may not be subject to them. And the board is committed to that. But the view of the Attorney General's office is if you put it in your bylaws, you are effectively making yourself legally subject to the open meetings law. And what I want to do is preserve the difference between being legally required to do something and voluntarily being a transparent board in which we are saying we are going to follow the Open Meetings Act, particular provisions of the Open Meetings Act, because we're choosing to do so. And the example I will give again is, you know, when you have an advisory body, it's not subject necessarily to all of the same requirements as a committee that makes binding decisions. By saying we are going to comply with the Open Meetings Act, and the Attorney General taking the view that you are therefore obligating yourself legally to comply with the Open Meetings Act, meaning the AG can enforce it, we create a situation in which someone can make a complaint and say, you have said, it doesn't matter that your committees are advisory, you have said you're going to comply with this, and therefore you are subject to it, and we are not able to sort of raise the defense that we're only an advisory body and therefore we didn't need to have it within 30 days. So it's really just preserving that difference between what we choose to do voluntarily as a transparent board versus what can be enforced against us in a complaint.
I understand that. It just sounds to me exactly what we discussed. And
I think there was a discussion of
we set
wanting to,
ourselves a higher standard, but I don't want to, I just don't want it to look like we're coming back to discuss an issue that I thought was resolved for the time being.
yeah, I mean, I personally feel that this is consistent because I believe the board has stated their commitment to continue to have open meetings. And these changes are saying we will continue to have open meetings. And I think that we can continue to do so, but we won't necessarily have ourselves subjected to complaints with the Attorney General if there was a defense that would have been available to us under the law, like an exception that would have applied to us, that we made by putting this language here, make ourselves not be able to use that exception.
So do we not think that the standing committees are applicable under the law of requiring to have open meetings? Like we think that there's an argument to be made that these don't necessarily have to be open meetings for standing committees like this?
I do think there is an argument to make. I don't think that we would want, based on what I'm hearing from the board, that we would want to make that argument. I think we're saying that we want our standing committees to have open meetings, but that doesn't mean we necessarily want to have all of the specific technical requirements of the Open Meetings Act apply if there's potentially an applicable defense to a complaint that might come against us.
I think I need more time to digest this. I don't feel totally comfortable until I gotta read for me to vote on it.
Okay, I think that makes sense.
Sure.
I'm open to that. I'm open to having a continued conversation. I think I look at bylaws and I look at practice as two different things.
Right.
I look at bylaws as what are our legal obligations. And so I think bylaws and aligning that with our legal obligations is really important to many of the things that Alyssa talked about. And then I think the practice to which, and our practice continues and will continue to be, that we will be transparent, that will be communicative, that we will make sure that folks come into meetings and participate, that the university, we are an open door to the university. That's a practice to which we follow. And so I just want to make sure that we're deciphering between the two. I'm more than happy for us to have some time and to talk about it further, but that's how I'm delineating the two. I just wanted to share how I'm thinking about it. Because right now, our bylaws do not align with the legal requirements.
I just want to go back and I want to reread the Open Meetings Act because I just feel like this, if not the language, I think the intent of the legislature would have been to have meetings like this, open meetings, but maybe I'm wrong on that.
No, and Matt, I don't think that we're trying to make an argument that they wouldn't. I think we're continuing to have open meetings, as Courtney said, as a practice, and we're actually stating here that we would do so in accordance with the applicable provisions. And I think the exception language is just to say, except as required by open meetings, except as otherwise allowed, that we would conduct them. And the idea of that was that we may have work groups that are less than a quorum of the board. We want to be sure that those don't fall under this. We want to be sure that if a committee, for instance, we have a committee meeting in which no action is taken, and it's meant to be sort of more informal discussion meeting, and where we may want to do something, that just preserves the possibility to do that. And it also, in terms of conducted pursuant to, by adding applicable, it's just making sure that things like that like that 30-day requirement that doesn't apply to advisory bodies wouldn't end up applying to our committees. All of our committees are advisory except for the executive committee, which has the authority to take binding action between meetings. And there are certain provisions of the Open Meetings Act that don't apply to advisory bodies. And the concern is that we're making ourselves subject to those. So while we can continue to do that and plan to continue to do that, and I think the bylaws reflects that we continue to have open meetings, I'm just trying to not inadvertently make ourselves subject to something and not preserve defenses that are available to us.
All right, so it sounds like we're going to defer any vote on this item, give the governance committees a chance to review the Open Meetings Act as well as the bylaws and what we're suggesting here. Alyssa, keep me honest, there's no specific timeline that we're butting up against for this, correct?
Nope, not at all. This is just part of the normal annual review, and it wasn't, it wasn't driven by any particular timely topic.
Okay, perfect. Governance committee members, does this sound like a good plan?
Yes, I would appreciate it. I just need to have a few things clarified myself.
Sure.
Thank you.
You got it. So we'll make sure that happens. It's not a problem. So I'll ask committee members if they have specific questions to send them Alyssa's way so that she can compile them and we can come back to this at our next meeting. All right. All right. Our next item on the agenda is item number 4, Charlie Fogarty's favorite, adjournment. Charlie Fogarty, may I have a motion to adjourn, my friend?
I make a motion that we adjourn.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second it, Matt Lenz.
Thanks, Matt. I'll ask for a voice vote. All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion to adjourn is approved. The next URI Board of Trustees Governance Committee meeting is tentatively scheduled for February 2026. We'll see you all at the board meeting next week.
Thank you, Matt.